Hey folks, Ted from Immersion here, and I just wanted to make a follow-up video to my build video that came out earlier today, or maybe yesterday by the time you're watching this. And one, I want to say thank you to everyone because you all came out with pretty much overwhelming support to say you really liked this video. You found it informative, you'd like to see more. So, congratulations, those of you that were hoping for more build videos in the future, you get your wish. I will be doing more build videos in the future. Also, I wanted to touch on a handful of points that were brought up in the comments. There was a bunch of different recurring themes I saw. So here's the character on D&D Beyond. So a lot of people, it was actually very mixed, if I'm being honest, about like why some people said they'd want to see the build from, start at level 1 and build up, and I can definitely do that and talk about importance of ability scores and things like that. So one, this character was a character that I'd actually made to play in a campaign. So people were like, oh, I want to know more about the background and the RP of the story decisions of why you picked this race or why you picked this background and things like that. And that's all stuff I can do. Here's the problem with a couple of things with that. This is a character that I built for a campaign, so I have a story and I have experiences of playing this character in game. I came to the realization when reading the comments that I think I've had a grand total of 5 5th edition characters that have actually played in a campaign, 2 of which are currently ongoing campaigns, 1 of which has been on hiatus for 3 months, and the other one we're only 10 sessions deep, so I don't have a ton of experience with the character. Oh, and a third of those 5 was an Unearthed Arcana subclass that has been just discontinued and then sort of revamped with a newer version, and then again, it's still Unearthed Arcana, so you can't really count on that. So I don't have a ton of, I just don't have a ton of 5th edition in-game experience to tell you, like, oh, I played this character, here's some anecdotal scenarios of what happened, or some really cool times that I did a ton of damage, or did this one unique thing really well. I don't really have that option to give to you all as experience. I just don't have it because I'm always the DM and I just don't have the time to play in campaigns the way I'd like to. So there's that. Also, if I'm going to keep doing builds and it's not one of those 4 or 5 characters that I just discussed, the character will be created purely for the purposes of the build. Therefore, I don't really have any background story information to give you while I'm doing this. I guess I could vamp it on the spot and say, okay, this character is this, and this is why I chose this background and things like that. But the functions, at least in my mind, of build videos are typically crunchy, number crunching. I made this build to do this thing or to do these series of things well. That's why I did them. And in some cases, like this build that I'm showcasing right here, the race is not important, right? The statistics that I got, basically, I guess I should say, for this, because I chose Tempest Cleric as the main boost, right? You're gonna need Wisdom. But honestly, that's not even important either. The really only thing you need to make this work is the attacking stat that you need to be high enough so you can guarantee hits. Whether that's strength or dexterity, that doesn't really matter. Booming Blade is a cantrip. It's only based off of your attack roll. So long as your attack roll is good, you'll do well. It doesn't have to be a two-handed weapon. It could have been done with a long sword. Could have been done with a great axe, a great sword. That doesn't really matter. Great Weapon Master factoring in there means it has to be a heavy weapon, so that's something to consider. Although you could pull Great Weapon Master out and go for maybe dueling and just get a static +2 more damage if you're going that route. Again, other things to consider. You don't necessarily need to choose Eldritch Knight Fighter as the option. That just was the background that I built into the character. You could do a multi-class, basically anything cleric with anything that's going to get you access to Booming Blade. Honestly, you could do this with the Magic Initiate feat, and then you'd have Magic Initiate and be 20 levels of cleric, and the Booming Blade side of things works just the same. You'll still have it leveling up with you leveling up, and you don't actually need the other levels. I chose this because it gave me, the fighter background, or a fighter multi-class gave me options that fit the character, and the concept of going Eldritch Knight also worked out relatively well because that gave me access to Action Surge, some self-healing. I got boosted defense with the fighting style, though I could have chose, great weapon fighting and rerolled 1s and 2s on my Maul dice. And then I had options. I had more survivability options with Shield, Absorb Elements, Magic Missile. I had the added chance to get a continual advantage on that one attack using the Familiar, right? But you could take Magic Initiate Wizard and then have your Find Familiar be your level 1 spell, Booming Blade be one of the cantrips, and then this could be a level 1 to 20 Cleric build. And in that case, I'd recommend probably being a variant human, so you could take Magic Initiate at level 1 and then have Booming Blade out the gate and just go the whole time using Booming Blade, and then it would just get better and better as you went on as a cleric. You could multi-class this again with anything that would get you Booming Blade for those purposes. You could do Storm Sorcerer. I saw a lot of people bring up. That's an option. People had brought up maybe you should take Elemental Adept Thunder. As a frame of reference, folks, there's only, I think, four total creatures in all of 5th edition official published sources, and by that I mean Monster Manual, Volo's Guide to Monsters, and Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes that are immune to thunder damage, and only 22 between all 3 of those combined that are resistant to thunder damage. So I don't really see a huge need to go Elemental Adept Thunder in that respect. You could use it for turning the 1s on damage dice into 2s, but the purpose of this was to use Channel Divinity to maximize and not need to roll. But on those scenarios where you don't have access to your Channel Divinity and you have to roll, that would benefit you there as well. Let me see what other things were brought up. Someone had mentioned I had talked about not having extra attack. What I meant by that was not going 5 levels into fighter. It didn't make any sense to me to get extra attack, because the whole crux of this build was using Booming Blade, which is a cantrip, which is casting the spell, a cast a spell action. So you didn't really have any benefits from taking 5 levels in fighter, because that wouldn't get you couldn't do 2 attacks and still do Booming Blade. So that's why I kept it at level 4 fighter, and I only did that for the ability score. Realistically, you could go fighter level 3, 17 cleric, so you could have access to 17th level cleric spells and the Tempest cleric ability to fly. That could work as well. But I just wanted to point that out. And, Action Surge, you could cast Booming Blade on one turn and then Booming Blade the second turn right after that. If you miss with the first one, if you connect and you want to try to connect again, depending on where you are scenario-wise, maybe the first one, someone put vulnerability on it and you can hit it that way, and then you have your Familiar come in and give you advantage. Maybe you can get super lucky and roll double crits on 2 attacks in a row and do some crazy damage. And then again, obviously, if you choose to multi-class rather than Cleric Fighter, but went with something like Sorcerer, Wizard, Warlock, you would have access to potentially other spells. You'd have access to maybe other lightning-based or thunder-based spells that you could maximize. This, again, was based around thunder damage, but in theory, right, you could do this with Lightning Bolt or Chain Lightning. But honestly, if you're going to go the lightning route, probably your best bet would be Witch Bolt. I hate Witch Bolt as a spell, personally. I don't really like it. I don't like that you charge up the first damage and then the consistent damage every turn is just a d12. I get that it would be kind of overpowered if it was just constant damage at the maximum amount. But at the level we built this character that you can see right here, he could cast spells here at level 18. He could cast, 8th level spells? Yeah, 8th level spells. So he could deal... you could do a Witch Bolt, and again, if you manage to hit, depending on how the multi-class and things work out, it is a to-hit spell, so therefore, as we discussed in the video, it puts the control in your hands. That would deal, I'm going to do some math because my math is off, that would deal 8d12 damage if you manage to hit with an 8th level Witch Bolt, which would be dealing lightning damage, which you could then maximize to a grand total of 96 lightning damage. But if you manage to crit on your attack, you will be doing 16d12 lightning damage, which is an attack roll. There's no saving throw for them to resist. And then if you manage to crit and maximize your Witch Bolt, you're doing 192 damage with one attack. My point of this being, a ton of people told me in the comments, well, you could do this better, you could do Call Lightning, you could do Chain Lightning, you could do Lightning Bolt. My point being, the crux of me doing this class, realistically, was you do all of this damage with a cantrip. You don't have to spend higher level spell slots to do any of this. What I just talked about with Witch Bolt doing 192 damage in one shot, that's an 8th level spell. You're only ever going to get one of those a day, so you're going to blow that. I guess you could argue that you could channel Divine Intervention that away, and then that would happen. But you're using an 8th level spell slot to do 192 damage. I'm doing over 100 damage with a cantrip. That was kind of the point, is that is a go-to resource that you can continually use, as long as you are able to get short rests to get your Channel Divinity back, which at 17, you'll have 3 Channel Divinities, so you could do this 3 times a short rest. You could continually output this as long as you're not stacking up other things on top of it, right? Like you could, like we talked about, Holy Weapon gives you the d8s of radiant damage. Another person brought up, yes, you could stack on 2 levels of Paladin at the end here, which you definitely could do, and then you could boost your damage into ungodly amounts, which I will bring up. First of all, my character here, he only has a 12 charisma, so he couldn't multi-class into Paladin anyway, because he doesn't have 13 charisma. So that wasn't an option for him. But 2 levels of Paladin, which is a 2-level multi-class, which is sort of the problem. But it would get you access to a fighting style, which you could then take, say, Great Weapon fighting to get that rerolls of the 1s and 2s. And then you'd have access to Divine Smite. At this point, you could spend a 5th level spell slot or a 4th level spell slot on Divine Smite to deal 5d8 extra radiant damage, 6d8 if that is a fiend or undead. And then in our ultimate scenario where you crit, you're adding an extra 10d8 radiant damage on top of everything we just discussed, plus, or 12d8 radiant damage if they're a fiend or undead. On top of that, Paladin also gives you access to the Paladin spell Thunderous Smite, which is a bonus action spell which adds 2d6 thunder damage to your attack, which if we did that, that's actually probably the better reason to go Paladin in that respect, is 2d6 thunder damage in our ultimate crazy crit scenario just tacks 24 damage on top of everything because it's thunder damage. So we'd have our Divine Strike, we'd have our Booming Blade, and then we'd have Thunderous Smite, thunder damage on top of that. If we had our ultimate scenario where we were at using Great Weapon fighting, using this style of what we have here, we'd be looking at about 120 damage, just static numbers, not rolling anything. Then we'd have our 4d6 maul damage on top of that. That's also not to say someone else in the party could concentrate on the Holy Weapon cast on you to add the more damage, so someone else could concentrate on that because they can cast it on you. Also, my character here that we're talking about only has a +1 maul, right? You could have a +3 maul, and that'll add more damage to that. Unfortunately, as a lot of us have seen, there's not a lot of great magic hammers. The only really magic hammer that I can think of is the Hammer of Thunderbolts, which is stupid, crazy legendary, and you're likely never going to get access to one because you need to have a whole bunch of magic items to make it work. You need the Belt of Giant Strength and a Gauntlets of Ogre Power attuned to both of those to then gain access to this. But this is a +1 maul. But if you attune to it, it increases your strength score by 4. It can exceed 20, but not 30. When you roll an attack that's made with this against a giant, they need to make a saving throw or they die. It has the Throne property, and it can do all sorts of other stuff when you throw it. It releases a thunderclap, and they need to make a save or be stunned. But that still doesn't do a ton other than boosting your strength up by 4. So, in theory, right, if you had access to a giant strength belt, something to boost your strength higher than 20, because this character has a maximum strength of 20, that will increase your damage. But unfortunately, there's not a ton of options out there to really boost a damage on a hammer. There are obviously other things, right? Like if you were using a greatsword and you had a Sword of Sharpness and you crit, I think a Sword of Sharpness does just like an extra 17 damage on a crit or something like that. And that's another, if you wanted to go for the ultimate, the ultimate static build, Sword of Sharpness, where is it? On a crit, 14 damage. So if we crit with a great Sword of Sharpness in that whole scenario, we'd be at 134 static damage. If you roll a d20, that target would take the extra 14 slashing damage. And then if you roll another 20, you lop a limb off. So there were ways to build this. The point, I guess, I just wanted to touch on this because, again, first of all, I want to say I'm not upset. I appreciate all of the comments and everything that everybody brought up. I really do. I just wanted to give you an idea of where I was coming from this scenario. And obviously, the concept, as I stated, was to you do this primarily with a cantrip and to also primarily use static numbers rather than dice rolls. A lot of people were telling me how much crazy damage you could do with all of these other abilities stacked on top of all each other. Smites and Eldritch Smite from a Warlock and Divine Smite from a Paladin. But all of those are die rolls. You could, in theory, roll all ones on all those d8s, and then your damage is crap. This is a static number. Again, if you wanted to build the ultimate static number build, then maybe the Sword of Sharpness would be a good way to go, because if you manage to crit with it, it's just going to tack 14 more damage on top. So the point of this was do as much damage as you can do with using the most limited amount of resources available, aka cantrip, which is unlimited, and a channel divinity, which recharges on a short rest. Also, not be reliant on a ridiculous amount of magic items to make this happen, which all I had was a +1 maul. You could do this with just a regular maul. It didn't have to be +1. That just overcomes damage resistance. So that wasn't really a function of the build either. And then also just to kind of keep things within a relatively not ridiculous amount of multi-classing realms. And this is also a character that I built, right? This is one that I actually played and was able to give you some real world experience of kind of how I managed to do this. And it sort of came to me over time. And remember, this happened, I built this character 5 years ago. So, like, the theory crafting, and obviously you can't reference anything that exists since then, like the Hexblade and any of that kind of stuff, because it didn't exist back then. We had just gotten those 4 cantrips in Sword Coast Adventures Guide, and that was pretty much it. Everything else was relatively, didn't exist. Nothing from Xanathar's was an option for us at the time. Again, like I said, there are ways to increase this damage if you're using other kinds of weapons and if you have other boosting magic items that can do additional things. If you did the Heroic Chronicle thing we did in the other video and you could sheathe your weapon in flames, then you could do a d6 extra fire damage on top of that. As far as dealing race-wise, again, I picked a human because that was the character that fit the thing. If you were a half-orc and you were doing all of that, you could hack an extra damage die on top of that using the savage attacks from the half-orc. That would give you a little bit more damage. But this really wasn't necessarily the ultimate damage build. There are better ways to do that. This was just a cool concept of using Eldritch Knight, which a lot of people, and I will agree, is not necessarily the best and most balanced subclass, but to make it actually work out well and provide you a bunch of different opportunities to use the survivability and not focus on your intelligence to buff up your cleric. But as I stated from the beginning, this could all just be done with a level 1 to 20 cleric and magic initiate to get yourself access to the Booming Blade cantrip, and then everything else is kind of gravy at that point. So thank you all so much for watching. A big shout out to my patrons on Patreon who have been blowing up recently. We're approaching 50 patrons now, which is crazy because I have said if I hit 50 patrons and I'm able to maintain that, I will bring back It Builds Character, which is my live stream version of character building, but where I build existing pop culture characters. So rather than me doing a build concept like you saw here, I'm building like I've built in the past. I built Ben 10, I built Shrek, I built Tingle, I built, Darth Vader, Trevor Belmont, I've done, I've done all over the place. I did Mr. Wednesday from American Gods. I've done TV comics. I did some biblical heroes as well, anime. I can think of a handful of different anime characters off the top of my head. Ichigo from Bleach, Himura Kenshin from Rurouni Kenshin. I've done a bunch of them, right? They exist. There's a playlist. I'll put it in the description again if you want to go check them out. They were all streamed, and those character sheets I think are pretty much all available in a Google Drive folder if you want to go check those out. But yeah, so if I can maintain 50 patrons, I will bring that series back. I don't know what day of the week and things it will fall on, but I will bring back, it's about an hour-long stream where I build the character, but I use your feedback live rather than just getting this via YouTube video. I get the feedback live, and we kind of craft the character together. And again, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, I would love it if you did so. But if you don't want to, you know what? That's your call. You're an adult, or I assume, because you're on YouTube and not YouTube Kids. So go ahead and make your own decisions, and I will see you all next time.